Okay, welcome to this video for Callum Cymru. This is a video for GCSE Art and Design guidance, and I am Miss Saunders, art teacher. This is guidance that can be used for Unit 1 or Unit 2. So Unit 1 is the portfolio, which is worth 60% of the total GCSE, and Unit 2 is the externally set assignment, which is worth 40% of the GCSE. It is important to remember that the structure of this can be approached very differently, and the guidance I'm going to give you in this video is one way of approaching it. Your teacher might recommend a completely different way, and you might be able to bring in elements from these videos that help to enhance your project, or you might decide that this is how you'd like to approach it. This way isn't particularly better or worse than any other way, it is just one way of approaching it. What's really lovely about the Art GCSE is that it is a really creative project, and you can address the assessment objectives in many different ways as long as you are addressing them. So, as I said, you've got the 2 units, and within that there are 7 endorsements. Now, this is something that your teacher will have entered you for. So you might be aware that you're doing photography or critical and contextual studies, or you might be doing art, craft and design as an overall selection of things. So within art, craft and design, you could do aspects of some of the other endorsements. You could look at bits of textiles or photography or painting or drawing. So mostly through this video, I will be referring to the art and design endorsement, but it's important to remember that the assessment objectives are the same for all 7. So the process of creating your project is the same, whichever discipline you are working under. And that is one of the really lovely things about the GCSE, is that this whole process is the same as or similar to that which artists use to create work. So the creative process can be applied to any of those endorsements. So, as I said, there are 4 assessment objectives. AO1, critical understanding. AO2, creative making. AO3, reflective recording. And AO4, personal presentation. So those 4 do not stand alone. There isn't a section that you complete that is AO1 and a section for AO2 and AO3 and AO4. They feed into one another, much like the creative process does. There will be aspects and elements of your project that address 1 or 2 or 3 or all 4 of those assessment objectives. So it's important to think of the whole thing as a process rather than as different things to meet those objectives. So the diagram that you can see on the screen shows this sort of triangular way of looking at the creative process. So everything is filtering down into the final outcome. So you've got phase 1, which is your initial project ideas. So thinking very early, and that's going to be a lot of what this video is about what your project is going to be. Those really beginning, wild, exciting ideas of what you might look at. Phase 2 is becoming slightly more specific. So that triangle, that filter is narrowing ever so slightly. You will look at, or you might look at, artist studies, the context of your project, which we'll talk about in a moment, the photography of your chosen subject matter, observational studies of your chosen subject matter, and photography and observational studies will kind of link together very well. Often it's too difficult for us to sit and observe something if it were something in nature or an animal that isn't often going to be staying still. So that is where photography is an excellent tool for that. Relevant gallery or museum visit. You might go on a school trip. You might be lucky enough to be taken somewhere by your family or your friends or whoever you live with. Or maybe you live near a gallery or a museum. They are often free, especially for students and children. So do a little bit of research and see if you can go somewhere. Reading and listening and interviewing around your idea. This is the point where you become a complete expert in whatever it is you are looking at. So Tell everyone you know what you are looking at, and then they can help to feed into your project, tell you ideas, discuss things with you, and that will help that section be really rich. Phase 3 is when you try out informed artwork ideas. So that means creating different compositions, using different colours, making art from the things that you've researched. So it says there, make a range of development pieces. So they're not finalised, they're developing. You might play around with scale and size. You might think about the message that your pieces are showing. And that is a time when you are creating. So you're really hitting the creative making assessment objective, but you'll also be making notes about it, which addresses the reflective recording part. You'll also be presenting what you're doing, which is AO4. You'll be relating back to your context, which is AO1. So as you see, each phase does use or address all 4. Phase 4 is then refining and planning. So practicing anything that didn't go so well in your development. Make adaptations, try something else. Perhaps you created a very large scale portrait and realised that actually, although quite small, you felt quite confident in your realism. When it got really, really large, it lost a little bit of the effect. So you want to pull it back down again and try it again to be able to maintain that realism or that level of accuracy with your drawing, just for an example. You might try a different version, like I said, bigger or smaller, a different layout, take new photos maybe even. Try photoshopping some changes or using a digital element of your work, to really enhance things. Or perhaps your work is digital, and so you come away from digital to practice, refine, plan on paper. You will make boards or sketchbook pages on these experiments and adaptations. And then this filters right down into your final outcome. So depending on your endorsement, that's going to be a different thing. It could be photography, it could be textiles, it could be critical written work or critical work like that. In the heading of art, craft and design, often people create paintings or drawings or sculptures. You could do a combination of those things, but the thing that they all have in common is that there does tend to be a final outcome. Everything that we've discussed there will include note making and explanations and different ways of drawing and sketching out your ideas. And usually people will present those in a sketchbook or on a series of boards. People sometimes use a website or create a film or some kind of animation showing these ideas. The exam board doesn't specify what this has to look like. But if you've seen lots of examples of GCSE projects, typically these are often in sketchbooks. But the more exciting you can create your presentation, the better. Think about what you might want this to look like. What works best for you? You want to be able to get your ideas across and address those assessment objectives in a way that makes sense for the project you are looking at. Okay. So I will be creating a series of 4 videos, including this one, and they will address the following titles or sections of the structure that I'm offering. As I've mentioned, not the only structure that you can use, but one way of doing it. So this is video 1, getting started. So theme selection and project planning. So getting everything together at the very beginning. Video 2, contextual references and artist studies. Video 3, photography and observational work. And video 4, that refinement and development to final piece, as I mentioned. So this is video 1. And the general outcomes from this video will be thinking about, or perhaps even having made the decisions once you've been through this video a few times, of your theme, medium, and artist selection. Perhaps you've already decided those things, and this video will just help you enhance those decisions and really make sure that they make sense with each other, which I'll get into in a moment. And then a resource that I've created is your project proposal sheet, which could help you to fine-tune those ideas. And then mind mapping or initial ideas page or pages or boards or whatever you would like to work with. And then some contextual research as well. Okay. Another way of thinking about the assessment objectives is that you are trying to answer a series of questions. So one way that I suggest looking at it, or I offer for you to look at, is you need to show your skills, whatever those might be. So playing to your strengths, what are you good at? You have now been an artist for several years, whether that's from year 7 until now, whether that's right from when you were very young, or whether you have been part of an art club or it's something that you've done at home. You have been practicing art for a while in order to be a GCSE artist. You have chosen art because you like it, you feel like you're good at it, you are excited about it, it is something that you think that you could succeed in. So what skills do you want to demonstrate? What do you enjoy doing and what are you good at? If you're not sure, talk to your teacher. Look through your work, find the things that you felt that you get the best feedback for. Playing to your strengths at GCSE, as well as experimenting new things, is a really clever way of looking at it. Then you need to decide, what is your project going to be about? You will need to do some research, thinking about articles, poems, interviews, statistics, documentaries. It doesn't have to be those things. I am a person that is quite interested in language and writing, and the kind of artwork that I personally, not as a teacher or as the person making this video, but just as myself, like to go and see is often artwork that is visually interesting, but also has depth and meaning and is, you look at it and you think, what does this mean? Oh, wow, maybe it means that. Maybe it's about that thing I read about in the newspaper 10 years ago. Oh, wow, it is. Or maybe it's about a social issue going on. Those are the things that I get most excited about. That's not to say that those are the best things, but personally, that is where I would, if I were creating a GCSE project, want to take my work, because that's where I'd be most excited. So think about what you look at and love. Go to a gallery, have a look around, work out which piece was your favourite, find out what it was about, see if you can do similar research to whatever that person did. Speak to the people at the gallery. Google the person, the artist whose work you saw, Google their name and find out what kind of work, what kind of things influence their work. As I said briefly before, you'll want to take photographs. Where can you go to look at inspiring things? It's important that you make these decisions with all this in mind, because if you decide to take photographs of a day when it's snowed and the village you live in is covered in snow, that is a one-off. So the next time you need to, do some more drawing or some more research or some more photographs into your work, it isn't there for you. It's not snowed, it's melted, and it's now spring, and that image doesn't exist anymore. So some of the best projects are projects where students can revisit the thing that they're taking photographs of or the thing that they are studying. Often some really successful projects are things like portraiture. Often is successful if it is someone that they know very well, a sibling or a friend that they can go and take more and more photographs of, realise that they want a closer up photograph or a different background. Equally, there could be something that you do as a hobby. There could be something that your family are interested in. Maybe you live in an area that has something really specific and interesting about it. Hobbies and lifestyles and all of those things that make up who we are often have objects or images or things that go with them that could make really interesting art projects. So thinking carefully about what objects or images you can draw and photograph will really enhance your work. So there again, observational work. So that word observational means looking. How will you show that you have looked carefully at your subject? You need to show that you've learnt from artists, even artists in the Renaissance period like Caravaggio and Da Vinci. They learnt from masters. They copied a little section of someone else's work in order to understand how to create the same sort of techniques that they did. So often in GCSE projects, people will do a little copy or study of another artist's work in order to get a feel for the skills or the techniques that they use, which we will talk about. And then that bit that I mentioned earlier, experimentation and refinement. How will you make your work the best it can be? We don't create the first image and decide that's good enough. You tweak it and add to it and do some more research and try it again until it is, really full of all of the things that you've been looking at. All of these things help to address the assessment objectives and feed back into each other. If you have taken excellent photographs and drawn the thing that you are looking at, your experimentation and refinement is going to be more enhanced because you're going to be quite the expert in looking at the thing you're drawing. If your research has meaning and depth, then it's going to come easier to you when you put together your final outcome, what that should look like, because you're going to know what your message is, what you're trying to show your teacher and your examiner and your audience of your art. So this video is going to be mainly focusing on the top 3 questions. What skills do you want to demonstrate? What are you good at? What is your project going to be about? And then what research are you going to be looking at? So we're going to be talking about how to make those decisions. We will also talk a little bit about artists. So, thinking about your theme, I'm being very careful not to give you specific examples because I don't want you to just pick the theme that I'm suggesting. But when I say theme, it can be anything. It could be a hobby, it could be a lifestyle, it could be a job, it could be an object, it could be a book that you love. Art can truly be about anything. There are some limitations to the things you can choose because you are a GCSE student, so talk to your teachers about things that you are doing, but that is only in terms of appropriateness and safety. In terms of topics, it is really up to you, unless your teacher gives you something more specific. I know some art teachers will give you a heading and really help to refine your theme if that's the way that they've chosen to teach this project. So that might be one way. You might already know your theme. So your teacher might have told you what your theme is. If not, then you need to choose one, and that's exciting too. Both work very well. However you get to the idea of what your theme is, you need to be sure you know what your project is going to be about. If someone walked into your art lesson or when you were sat doing some work for your art project and said, "What's your art about?" you should know the answer, even right from quite early on. If you don't, it's going to be difficult to address those assessment objectives and to drive your journey of your project forward. So really try to hone in on what that is going to be. From there, you need to do some research. As I've said, exciting artwork has meaning. The word personal is used quite a lot in the exam, in the marking criteria from the exam board. So your work having personality and being personal and meaningful to you is really important. Some of the most highly marked and just most exciting projects I have seen in my career as an art teacher have been projects that are about family or heritage or something that is very personal to that person. And I'm not suggesting you need to, when I say personal, I'm not suggesting you to share secrets or super personal things that would make you uncomfortable. I just mean something that is specific to you. Those are sometimes the most exciting projects. As I said, from that, what will you look at to put your work into context? Artists exist in context. Their work is relevant to who they are, where they are from, where they are making art, when they are making art. It could be political, it could be emotional, it could have so many different ways of approaching it, but having some substance and some research behind it is important. That could be articles, poems, interviews, books, statistics. Maybe you've seen a video where somebody is talking through the idea that you are interested in. Maybe you've been to a visit, as I said earlier, and there's something that you saw that you are excited about. So that could be lots of different things, but it's important that there is some context to your work. So this is a document that I have created, a resource that you can use to start to pull all those ideas into one place. So the first thing is the idea or theme I've decided, or perhaps your teacher has decided to base your project on is. You need to be able to write it in that box. If it is longer than that, then perhaps you're not totally sure on what the idea is. You need to be able to put it together in a sentence or a couple of words and be quite sure what you are looking at. Number 2, the 3 or 4 minimum artists that I'd like to learn from and be influenced by are. Now that number is a number that I am suggesting. It isn't, you might have way more, you might have fewer, but you do need a range of evidence that you've looked at artists. it's a suggestion rather than a rule, as is everything else that I'm suggesting here. So the medium that you'd like to focus on, so that could be painting or drawing or digital work or photography or stitch or a combination of those things or any other kind of medium. But by this point, you should be quite sure what you might like to focus on. You will experiment and you will change those ideas and it will develop. But knowing that you roughly want to look at something to do with exploring with printmaking and pencil and projection. Maybe those aren't the things you go on to do, but at this point, if you can write down a few things, it will really help to give you direction. As you are selecting artists, it is really important that you answer the question, what you will learn from them. The reason I've put all of this onto one page is because if your artists don't relate to your theme, don't relate to your mediums, and don't relate to each other at all, it's going to be difficult to create a cohesive project from those decisions. So it's important that they sort of flow and make sense and influence each other in a way that you can explain. It might not make total sense to someone else, that's fine. But as long as you can explain those choices and why looking at those artists will inform your artwork, then you're fine. And then the fourth thing, as I've mentioned a few times, is what you're going to take photographs of. So you might use them in your work, or you might draw from them, paint from them, manipulate them with stitch. They might be observational or they might be the art. But either way, taking photographs is important. So your theme and your research, and then context. So putting all of those things together, you might start to create something that might look a bit like these examples that I'm going to show you now. So these are, some are from past students of mine and a couple are images that I have taken from some Google searches. So it's quite easy to have a little look at how other people do this. So you might decide, like these two people have, to create digital images. So these have been created, I think, on PowerPoint, and adding notes, putting images. You can tell from this a general sort of idea of what the student might create. Same with this one. If you read a little bit more carefully, it says they'd like to specialise in watercolour and pencil, and that they'd like to look at these different, I think they've got Pinterest links on there. There's some quotes at the top, and it links in biology. So you can start to see how a project could form from these ideas. It certainly isn't specific yet, and that is fine. The other way of doing it, so that would have been digital, is to hand create, draw, or write a mind map. So for example, you've got this one here, which is 2 pages of a sketchbook. It has drawings within it and lots of information as well. This one, a bit more simple, but absolutely fine, getting the ideas across. A much more drawn version of a mind map is also brilliant. So that is addressing creative making by drawing and showing skills, as well as context, as well as recording, and as well as presentation. So you've got all of the AOs are addressed within creating these things. Yeah. Again, a sketchbook page, you could make it a little bit sort of messier on purpose and trying to make it more colourful. So using the research you've carried out, after you've created your mind map, you might start to do some research and think about creating a context board or page or booklet or film. And this should be interwoven into your project and the artwork you create, but might also be a standalone thing that shows the research. I had a project with a student, create a project with me a few years ago who did create a little book that went alongside her visual work as a little story that went with what she was doing. And it was a really excellent way of addressing those assessment objectives and the meaning behind her work that she wanted to portray. So once you've started to get some research together, you might create a slightly more specific version of a mind map or initial ideas page, whatever you'd like to call it. So later in your project, it is really important that you use your own photography and you use primary sources, so things that you've seen, sat in front of, been there with. But at this stage, it is okay to add in some images from magazines or from the internet. It is okay to do that later on, but if you're aiming for the higher marks, primary resources are really important. So you can see this person is looking at beauty. They've looked at lots of different colours. They've added keywords. You can kind of get a feel for what kind of things they're interested in. You might call it a mood board. Again, here, it's the same person looking at beauty, but taking it a bit further. On the right, there's quite a lot of writing. And then the other images, there's also some drawings of the eye and the mouth. So there's a real range of things, again, being addressed here. This one is a different person. It goes into even more detail. There is some tickets, some little notes, some maps. This is looking at identity. So this is very personal. These are places that the person has been, images of the person and their friends. So there is, you know, a lot of depth in this one as well, but they all address that idea of communicating what your initial thoughts of the project could be. So thinking back to these questions, the next thing we need to think about is who you can learn from. So this is all still, just to nip back to the project proposal page, this is all still trying to populate this. You might make your initial ideas board or your mind map, do a bit of research, come back again, see if it all makes sense, and then think about how you're answering these questions and who you can learn from. So you might Google search, go to the library, go to a gallery and find some artists that you are interested in. Again, choosing artists you're excited about that make the kind of work you're excited about are really important. So these are just a few artists that I have found on the internet that to show you the range of what you could be looking at under art, craft and design. This is Henrietta Harris, who creates distorted painted portraits. So using excuse me, digital manipulation, as well as obviously their portraiture. If you're interested in using more flat colours and digital work like this, or perhaps printmaking, you might look at an artist like this. Halima Akhtar, if you're interested in anything liney or charcoal or mixed media. There is a huge range of what you can look at, and it's important that you choose things that relate to your theme and relate to the kinds of work that you would like to create. So there's just a few examples, another with an illustration artist. And then the final thing, which I have mentioned, but I'll refer back to again, is the photographs. So it's important, once you know who your artists are and you've decided your theme and your medium, you check again, can I take photographs of something that relates to these ideas? If you can, and you have answered pretty much all of those questions, then you are on track. You have got all your decisions made. And this bit is gold dust. Once you've chosen something you're excited about, found artists you're excited about, found things you can take photographs of and artwork that you would like to experiment with, you have laid an excellent foundation for the rest of your project. So, final thing from me, remember, and I know I've repeated this, but remember, the most important thing when making all of these decisions is that you are excited about the ideas. Number 2, your contextual references can be anything, but the best references are real life. So if you can, visit a museum, go for a walk, interview someone, watch a documentary and make notes, listen to a podcast, find out about an event going on near you. Even in small communities, there are things happening. If you're lucky enough to live somewhere that has a huge amount going on, go to those things. There's lots of free events and things that can inform your artwork. You know, ask someone to take you, speak to your teacher, find out what you can go and visit. And then the third thing to remember that's really important is that this video shows just one approach to building your art project. You can address the assessment objectives differently if you have different ideas. Ask your teacher for more guidance or visit the exam board website. So going onto the exam board website and seeing what's on there, going on the internet and looking at examples, seeing what other people have done is a really, really useful tool to be really informed about what your project might look like. Okay, well done for listening. I'm excited to continue and to show you what is next on our next video. Hope to see you then. Thank you very much.